After my father died, that farm became too quiet, as if even the wind missed him. I will never forget the feeling of that first winter without him. The farm remained exactly the same on the outside, the old red barn, the wooden fence worn by time, the vast fields swaying in the wind at the end of the afternoon, but inside, everything seemed different. Empty, cold, as if the very earth knew that someone important had left. My father was the kind of man who woke up before sunrise. Even on the hardest days, he found a way to smile as he walked through the pasture with a cup of coffee in his hands. It was impossible to imagine that place without his voice echoing through the fields. But suddenly, only silence remained. My mother changed a lot after his death. Before, she sang while preparing dinner, laughed at simple things, and always found a reason to gather the family on the porch at nightfall. After the funeral, she became distant. It wasn't ordinary sadness. It was as if a part of her had been buried with him. Sometimes I would find my mother standing near the kitchen window, staring blankly at the fields without saying a word. On other nights, she would simply disappear for hours inside the barn. And almost always, she was with the horse. Apollo. A calm-looking brown horse that my father loved more than anything on that farm. Since I was little, I grew up hearing stories about him. My father said that Apollo had saved his life once during a storm on the old road near the mountain. Perhaps that's why my mother had formed such a strong bond with that animal after his loss. It was strange, but at the same time it made sense. Apollo seemed to carry pieces of my father's presence. His quiet demeanor, the way he recognized our footsteps even before we approached. Sometimes it seemed as if he understood the pain of that house better than we did ourselves. One rainy afternoon, I found my mother inside the barn holding an old camera in her hands. She was silently filming Apollo as the horse walked slowly through the space illuminated only by the golden light of the sunset filtering through the cracks in the wood. "Why are you recording this?" I asked. She took a few seconds to answer. "Because some things disappear too quickly." Her voice was low, tired. At that moment, I felt a strange tightness in my chest. After that, the recordings became routine. My mother filmed the horse running through the fields, the sounds of the farm in the morning, the rain hitting the barn roof. Even small, silly moments of everyday life. At first, I thought it was just a way of coping with grief. But as the weeks went by, I realized it was becoming something bigger. Almost an obsession. She watched the videos every night. Sometimes she cried silently while staring at the television in the dark living room. Other times she smiled to herself listening to my father's old voice in old recordings I didn't even know existed. And the more my mother lost herself in that past, the more distant she seemed to become from me. The farm was already silent before. But now there was another kind of silence. That heavy silence of things that no one can say. I tried to help as best I could. She fed the animals, tended the fence, cleaned the stables. But nothing seemed enough to fill the emptiness of that house. Until, one cold Sunday night, my mother appeared at my bedroom door holding the camera in her hands. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying for hours. Then she said something I will never forget. "I need you to do something with me tomorrow, for your father." At that moment, without understanding why, I simply agreed. But deep down, something inside me told me that this recording would change everything between us. The next morning, I woke up even before the alarm clock rang. My mother's words wouldn't leave my head. "I need you to do something with me tomorrow, for your father." During breakfast, she barely spoke. She just sat looking out the window while slowly stirring the spoon in her cup. The silence between us seemed to grow longer each day. Outside, the sky was covered with gray clouds, and the wind swept across the fields with that sad sound I had already learned to associate with my father's absence. Apollo was near the main fence. Calm. Still. As if he were waiting for something. My father loved that horse in a way that's hard to explain. It wasn't just affection for an animal. It was a bond built over years, silent and profound. The two seemed to understand each other without needing commands. When I was a child, I loved watching them riding together at dawn. My father used to say that Apollo sensed people's moods. "Horses sense sadness before we admit we're sad," he used to say. At the time, I laughed. Today, I understood exactly what he meant. My mother appeared on the porch holding the camera again. She did this almost every day now. She recorded simple details of the farm as if she were trying to stop time from moving on. My father's old boots near the door. The smoke rising from the wood stove. The sound of the barn wood creaking in the wind. And especially, Apollo. Your mother's acting strange, my aunt commented once during dinner. I tried to defend her. She just misses him. But deep down, I knew it was more complicated than that. My mother wasn't just missing him. She was trying to keep my father alive somehow. That afternoon, she asked me to help brush Apollo while she filmed. At first, I thought it was normal. Even beautiful. The sun streamed across the fields in golden hues while the horse remained calm before us. My mother slowly zoomed in with the camera, almost as if every detail had sacred importance. Your father loved this sound, she whispered as the bristles of the brush glided through the horse's coat. What sound? The silence here. Her answer echoed within me. Because it was true. My father always said that the farm had a life of its own. That the wind, the animals, and even the rustling of the trees told stories that the city could never understand. My mother seemed to believe this now more than ever. That night, I noticed something strange. She was watching old recordings alone in the dark room. The television illuminated only part of her face, and for a few seconds I had the impression that she was smiling and crying at the same time. On the screen, my father appeared riding Apollo years ago. Happy. Alive. I had never seen my mother look at someone that way. Not even when he was still here. Do you think it's strange that I record these things? She asked without taking her eyes off the television. I took a few seconds to answer. No. I think it only hurts to remember. She finally looked at me. It hurts even more to forget. That sentence destroyed me inside. Because, for the first time, I began to realize something terrifying. My mother was more afraid of losing the memories of my father than she was afraid of her own loneliness. And perhaps that was why she clung so tightly to Apollo. As long as that horse is here, a part of your father still breathes on this farm. She said it almost in a whisper, as if she were trying to convince herself. That night, I went to sleep thinking about it. About memory. About longing. And about how some people will do anything to keep love from disappearing completely. The following days passed slowly, almost as if time had decided to move at the same pace as that silent farm. My mother kept recording everything. Sometimes I would wake up and find her in the yard filming the sunrise. On other nights, she would spend hours inside the barn talking quietly with Apollo while the camera remained on. It started to bother me. Not because it seemed wrong, but because it seemed too sad. It was like watching someone trying to hold water with their hands. One sweltering summer afternoon, I was repairing part of the fence near the pasture when my mother appeared, walking slowly toward me. She held the camera to her chest as she always did now. The wind ruffled her hair, and for a moment I realized how tired she looked. "Can I ask you something?" she asked. "Sure." She hesitated. That was enough to make me uncomfortable. My mother never hesitated before speaking. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I want to record an old farm tradition. With me, you, and Apollo." I immediately stopped what I was doing. "What do you mean?" She looked away towards the horizon before answering. "Your father did this every year. Before you were born." I confess I felt a strange shiver at that moment. Not because of the request itself, but because of the way she said it. As if it had a much greater meaning than I could understand. "And what exactly do I have to do?" She pressed the camera against her chest. "Just trust me." Honestly? That didn't help at all. That night, I barely slept. My mind started imagining 1,000 strange possibilities. My mother had been so different in recent months that I no longer knew what to expect. And the worst part was her mysterious manner. Every time I asked for more details, she answered with vague phrases or changed the subject. "You'll understand when the time comes. Your father loved this moment. It's important for our family." The more she talked, the more nervous I became. The next morning, she woke me up before dawn. Get up. The perfect light doesn't last long. Her voice sounded cheerful for the first time in months. When I left the room, I found old clothes laid out on the living room sofa. They were my father's clothes. Leather boots. Denim jacket. Old farmer's hat. Do you want me to wear this? She nodded slowly. Your father always wore these clothes on this day. I was speechless. I won't lie, it started to feel too awkward. Wearing my father's clothes while my mother filmed emotional videos with the family horse? There was something deeply uncomfortable about it all. But at the same time, I saw something different in her eyes. Hope. A small spark I hadn't seen since the funeral. So I agreed. When we arrived at the barn, the sun was beginning to rise behind the mountains, painting the fields with golden and orange hues. Apollo was already ready, with the old saddle my father used years ago. My mother turned on the camera. Her hands trembled slightly. Stand beside him, she whispered. I obeyed. The horse remained still, calm as always. My mother began filming silently, walking slowly around us. For a few seconds, the only sound was the wind rustling through the old wood of the barn. Then she started to cry. Out of nowhere. Silently. It destroyed me inside. Mom. She just raised her hand, asking me not to interrupt. After a few seconds, she took a deep breath and tried to smile. I'm sorry. It's just that, her voice faltered. You two look exactly the same. My heart clenched instantly. Because, at that moment, I finally understood what that recording meant to her. It wasn't about me. Nor about the horse. It was about longing. About trying to relive for a few minutes a happiness that no longer existed. Even so, there was still something strange about the whole situation. Something difficult to explain. While my mother continued filming, I noticed the intense way she observed every detail. As if she were desperate to capture that moment before it disappeared too. And for the first time, I began to wonder how far that obsession with memories could take her. After that first day of filming, my mother changed. Not drastically, but in small details that began to unsettle me. She seemed more present and distant at the same time. Sometimes she smiled while filming the fields at dawn, but just hearing some old music of my father's would bring tears to her eyes. The filming became part of the farm's routine. Every morning she would appear with her camera in hand and a new idea. Today I want to film you crossing the river. The late afternoon light will be beautiful near the barn. Your father loved this path behind the hill. At first, I thought it would help her overcome her grief. And perhaps it really did, in some strange way. But the more days passed, the more I realized that those recordings meant something much bigger. It wasn't about videos. It wasn't about simple memories. My mother was trying to save something inside her. On a particularly quiet afternoon, we went to the oldest part of the farm. It was a huge field surrounded by tall trees, where my father used to train Apollo years ago. The wind blew gently, raising dry dust along the path. My mother turned on the camera as I walked beside the horse. Look ahead, she whispered. I obeyed. For a few seconds, everything was strangely calm. The sound of the leaves, the clatter of Apollo's hooves on the ground, and that golden light of the end of the day created an almost unreal feeling. Then I heard my mother sniffling behind the camera. When I turned around, I realized she was crying again. But this time it seemed different. Deeper. Heavier. Mom. She immediately lowered the camera, wiping her face. I'm sorry. I thought I could do it. Do what? She hesitated before answering. Get through this without feeling like I'm losing him again. That phrase stuck in my head for the rest of the day. Because maybe that's exactly what was happening. Each recording brought memories to life. But it also made my mother relive the pain of loss repeatedly. That night, I found her sitting alone on the porch. The camera was on her lap, switched off. The sky was dark, and crickets were the only sound coming from the fields. Have you ever been afraid of forgetting someone? She asked suddenly. I sat beside her, unsure what to answer. Sometimes I try to remember your father's voice, and it starts to fade in my head. Her voice trembled. What if one day I can no longer remember the way he laughed? I felt a lump in my throat immediately, because I had that fear too. The truth is, time is frightening. People say it heals everything, but nobody talks about the little parts it steals from memory without asking permission. My mother picked up the camera slowly. That's why I record. She looked at the blank screen as if she were holding something precious. Because video doesn't let things die completely. At that moment, for the first time, I stopped seeing those recordings as something strange. And I began to see them as despair. The despair of a woman trying to fight against oblivion. In the following days, the recordings became even more emotional. My mother began asking me to repeat small traditions that my father used to do. Opening the gate the right way. Whistling while walking through the stable. Taking Apollo to the lake at dusk. Simple details. But each one seemed to carry an invisible pain. And, without realizing it, I began to enter that world along with her. Sometimes it was impossible not to feel my father's presence in those moments. Especially when I wore his old clothes or repeated habits I didn't even remember learning. At certain moments, I saw my mother watching me silently with teary eyes. As if she were seeing another person. That made me uncomfortable. Not in a bad way. But sad. Very sad. Because it was clear she was caught between two realities, the desire to move forward, and the fear of letting go of the past. During one of the recordings, the wind became so strong that the farm's power went out completely. The sky darkened quickly, announcing a storm. We ran inside the barn as the rain began to fall heavily on the wooden roof. My mother held the camera against her chest to protect it from the water. It was then that she said something that changed how I saw everything. Your father was afraid of being forgotten. I looked at her, not understanding. What do you mean? She took a deep breath before answering. Last week in the hospital. He held my hand and said he was afraid of disappearing from our lives. The silence after that sentence was unbearable. The rain was pouring down outside. Apollo remained motionless behind us. And my mother. She seemed finally broken. She started crying for real this time. Without trying to hide it. Without trying to appear strong. I had never seen my mother like that. So I did the only thing I could think of at that moment. I hugged her. And while she cried on my shoulder inside that dark barn, I finally understood something I had been ignoring for months. It wasn't about the horse. It wasn't about the videos. It was about a woman trying to stop the man she loved from disappearing completely from the world. After that night in the barn, something changed between us. For the first time since my father's death, I felt that my mother had let her guard down. As if the weight she carried was finally becoming too tiring to continue hiding. Even so, she kept recording. Every day. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and see the light of the television on in the living room. My mother would spend hours watching the recordings alone, holding a cup of cold coffee in her hands. Other times, I would find her standing in the hallway looking at old photographs as if she were trying to converse with the past. And the more I observed this, the more a strange feeling grew inside me. Fear. A silent fear that I still couldn't explain. One cold afternoon, while we were organizing old boxes inside the farm storage room, I noticed my mother losing her balance for a few seconds. She gripped the table quickly. Mom. I'm fine, she replied too quickly. But she didn't seem fine. She was thinner. More tired. The dark circles under her eyes had become deep, and the glow that sometimes appeared during filming was beginning to fade again. That night, I heard her coughing in the bathroom for several minutes. I stood behind the door, unsure whether I should go in. It was then that I began to understand that perhaps something much bigger was happening. Something she had been hiding from me all this time. 2 days later, it happened. The sun was setting behind the fields when I found my mother sitting near the farm's lake. The camera was off beside her, something rare lately. Apollo lay calmly on the grass, as if he knew that moment was important. I sat beside her in silence. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Only the wind rustling across the field. Then she took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you. My heart raced immediately. Her voice was different. Weak. I went to the doctor before starting all this filming. I felt the ground disappear inside me. She stared intently at the lake as she spoke. They found a serious problem. My throat went dry instantly. Mom. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were filled with tears. I wasn't recording videos for fun. I was trying to leave memories. The sentence hit me like a punch. For a few seconds, I simply couldn't breathe properly. Everything started to make sense at once. The obsession with the recordings. The constant fear of forgetting my father. The desperate way she tried to record every detail of the farm. She wasn't just afraid of losing someone. She was afraid of being lost too. Why didn't you tell me before? I asked, my voice faltering. She tried to smile, but couldn't. Because I already saw you lose your father. Her eyes filled even more. And I couldn't bear to see that look again. At that moment, I felt an indescribable pain. A mixture of anger, sadness, and guilt. While I thought those recordings were just a strange way of dealing with grief, my mother was silently trying to leave pieces of herself with me before it was too late. I looked at the camera beside her. Suddenly, she seemed much heavier. Each video now had a different meaning. They weren't just memories of the past. They were hidden farewells. I wanted you to have something to revisit when you felt homesick, she said softly. Tears began to fall down her face. Your father disappeared so quickly. I didn't want the same to happen to me. At that moment, I couldn't hold back anymore. I hugged my mother tightly as the sky slowly darkened over the farm. And for the first time since it all began, I cried with her. Not because of the past, but because of the terrible fear of the future. The day after that conversation by the lake, the farm awoke differently. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, and a light breeze swept across the fields as if the place itself was trying to breathe after so much accumulated silence. My mother seemed calmer. Tired, but calm. When I entered the kitchen, I found her making coffee while an old song played softly on the radio. It had been months since I'd seen that. Good morning, she said with a small smile. And honestly, that smile almost made me cry. Because I realized how much I missed the version of her that existed before the pain took over everything. After a few minutes of silence, she put the cup on the table and said something unexpected. I want to do one last recording today. My heart immediately tightened. She noticed. Don't look at me like that, she said, trying to joke. I haven't left yet. But the truth is, those words hurt more than they should have. In the late afternoon, she called me near the barn. Apollo was already ready. My father's old saddle was strapped onto him, carefully cleaned as if it had been saved for that specific moment. What are we going to film? I asked. My mother slowly ran her hand over the horse's neck. The family's last ride. The wind blew strongly at that moment, shaking the golden fields around us. For some reason, I immediately felt a lump in my throat. We mounted Apollo together just before sunset. I was in front, holding the reins, my mother right behind me, holding the switched-off camera to her chest. This time she didn't want to film. She just wanted to remember. We followed slowly along the trail behind the farm, the same one my father used to walk in the late afternoons. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, and everything around us seemed silently too beautiful to be real. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Only the sound of Apollo's hooves against the dry earth. Then my mother rested her head on my back and whispered, "Your father loved this time of day." I closed my eyes for a moment. I know. She took a deep breath. Sometimes I'm afraid I've spent so much time suffering that I've forgotten to live what's left. Her words hit me in an unexpected way. Because I was doing that too. We were both trapped between memories and fear, without realizing that time kept moving on anyway. You don't have to carry everything alone, I said. She was silent. After a few seconds, I felt her gently hold my arm. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For putting you in the middle of my pain. At that moment, my eyes filled with tears. Because I finally understood that my mother wasn't trying to turn me or Apollo into replacements for the past. She was just desperately trying to keep the family alive within her. Even broken. Even scared. Even without knowing how to move forward. The sun was beginning to disappear behind the mountains when we reached the top of the highest hill on the farm. And it was there, watching that enormous sunset covering the fields, that I felt something change inside me. A sad peace. The kind that hurts, but also liberates. My mother completely turned off the camera and placed it beside her on the wooden bench near the fence. Then she looked at the horizon and smiled with tear-filled eyes. At that sunset, I understood that some farewells begin long before goodbye. The wind swept across the field at that moment. Apollo remained motionless beside us. And, for the first time in a long time, the silence of the farm didn't seem empty. It seemed like love. A tired love. Hurt. But still alive. A few weeks after that last ride, my mother's health deteriorated rapidly. It was frightening to realize how someone can slowly disappear even while still being right in front of you. She no longer had the strength to walk around the farm as before. The recordings decreased until they practically stopped. The camera remained forgotten on the living room table, covered by a thin layer of dust. And the house became silent again. But now it was a different kind of silence. Heavier. More real. Sometimes I would find my mother sleeping on the porch while the wind slowly swept across the fields. Other times she would just watch Apollo through the window with that distant look I knew so well. As if she were slowly saying goodbye to everything. One rainy night, she called me to the bedroom. The light from the lamp illuminated only part of her face, and for the first time I felt real fear. Fear. Of losing the last person who still made that farm feel like home. She held my hand slowly. Promise me something? My throat immediately tightened. What? When I'm no longer here, don't let this place die. Tears began to fall before I even realized it. Mom. She squeezed my hand tenderly. Families don't end when someone leaves. Her voice was weak. They end when the memories fade. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in the dark room while the rain beat against the farmhouse windows. That's when my eyes fell on the old camera on the table. For the first time since the beginning of it all, I decided to watch the recordings alone. I confess I was afraid. Because, deep down, I knew those videos were no longer just memories. They were pieces of my mother trying to remain in the world. I put the first video on. My father appeared smiling near the barn while Apollo chased after him across the field. Then came my mother laughing at the shaky footage. Then me. Younger. Happier. With each recording, my chest tightened more. There was life in those images. Real life. The sounds of the farm. The wind. The laughter. The silly little moments that no one imagines will one day become the most valuable things in the world. And then I began to realize something I had never understood before. My mother wasn't just filming people. She was filming feelings. Trying to capture what time always takes away. I continued watching video after video for hours. In one of them, my mother appeared behind the camera asking simple questions. Are you happy today? Do you remember this place? What do you love most about this farm? At the time, those questions seemed normal. Now, they seemed like hidden farewells. Tears streamed down my face as I watched everything alone in that silent room. Because I finally understood the real reason for it all. She didn't want viral videos. She didn't want attention. She didn't want to turn pain into a spectacle. She just wanted to leave enough love stored away for when the longing arrived. And it did. I looked out the living room window. Outside, the rain fell on the dark fields while Apollo stood near the fence, exactly as he did in the days when my father was still alive. It was at that moment that a phrase flashed through my mind. Each recording seemed like a piece of her voice trying to stay with me. And maybe that was exactly it. Maybe loving someone is that in the end. Finding ways to continue existing within the memories of those who remain. That early morning, sitting alone in front of the old television on the farm, I finally stopped feeling angry about the pain. Because I understood that some memories don't hurt to destroy us. They hurt to remind us that something was truly worthwhile. After that night watching the videos, I couldn't look at the farm the same way anymore. Everything seemed slower, more meaningful, as if every corner of that place held a memory that I had only begun to truly see now. The following days were strangely silent. My mother no longer had the strength to get out of bed often, and Apollo spent more time standing near the fence, as if he too sensed that something important was coming to an end. But the strange thing is, there was no more fear inside me. Just a sad calm. An acceptance that didn't come suddenly, but that grew inside my chest as I understood everything that had happened up to that point. One afternoon, I sat alone on the farm's porch with the old camera in my lap. The same camera that had recorded everything. Everything. The same camera that had captured pieces of our history. I looked at the field in front of me and began to speak, even without knowing exactly where to begin. I never thought I would understand all of this. My voice came out low, almost lost in the wind. I thought my mother was just trying to live in the past, that she couldn't move on. I paused for a moment. I took a deep breath. But now I understand that wasn't it. I looked at Apollo, standing in the distance. He stared at me for a few seconds before turning his head back to the horizon, as if he were listening too. She wasn't stuck in the past. My throat tightened. She was trying to protect it within us. The wind picked up at that moment, shaking the golden fields of the farm. And for the first time, it didn't seem sad. It seemed beautiful. Because I understood something simple, but profound. People don't deal with pain in the same way. Some move on quickly. Others remain trapped in silence. And some try to turn everything into a memory before it disappears. That night, I watched one of the old videos one last time. My mother appeared smiling next to my father, before everything changed. They were near the barn, talking about simple things, unaware that that moment would one day be all that remained. And that's when I finally understood. Sometimes, people don't know how to say "I love you," so they try to turn moments into eternity. I closed my eyes for a few seconds after saying that in a low voice. Because that's exactly what my mother had done. She wasn't trying to relive the past out of weakness. She was trying to hold onto love with her own hands, even knowing that it always slips away. In the last few days, I've spent more time by her side. Holding her hand. Talking softly. Just being present. And that already seemed enough. One night before going to sleep, she looked at me and smiled weakly, but genuinely. "You learned, didn't you?" I nodded. I learned. She closed her eyes in peace. And in that instant, I understood that I didn't need anything more than that. Not perfect answers. Not grand endings. Just understanding. Today, when I look at the farm, I no longer see only loss. I see everything that existed there. My father's love. My mother's silent strength. And the strange human and imperfect way we all try to keep those we love alive. Maybe that's what nobody teaches us. That loving isn't just living together. It's also learning to keep someone in your memory, without letting the pain erase everything that was real. And if you've made it this far, maybe you also have someone like that inside you. Someone who still lives. In a different way. Because in the end, life isn't just made of presents. It's made of memories that refuse to disappear.